So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our great informative webinar yet again with David Corman. We are recording the session, so we will be adding it on YouTube for later viewership. We are talking about pre-construction transactions and what all is involved. I think this is a very appropriate topic with how things are and how finances, markets, and things have mortgage rates and all of that has changed over the few years, well, since people would have bought it to their closing the property. So over to you, David.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sabiha. It's great to be with this group as always. We even have David Gorski on here, so I better say some nice things about our podcast when I get there. But it's great to have everybody here, and it's an important topic to discuss. I know many of you do mostly resale transactions, and some of you do some pre-construction. Some of you are thinking about doing pre-construction. So today's session is sort of just to make you aware of some of the major differences when you're doing a pre-construction transaction. A purchase price isn't just a purchase price like you would have in a resale transaction. There's a whole bunch of additional potential costs that your buyer clients have to be aware of. Some to a certain degree negotiable, some aren't, depends on market conditions. But there's a whole bunch of potential costs that your buyer client may have to pay in addition to the purchase price on the agreement of purchase and sale. So that's why it's really important. So any of you doing any pre-construction or reviewing a pre-construction agreement for clients, you got to pay close attention to these things. So we want to talk about that, give you some context in that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about some new legislation that came in recently, Bill 60, and that's affecting some of these transactions going forward. So I'll give you a little bit of information on that as well. So thanks for joining us today. Let me skip through a couple of our introductory slides. Most of you know that I will pause at one slide. You know, David already knows which one it's going to be. Oh, there it is. Surprise. Um, we will be updating this picture very soon
Yes, yes, we have to.
because nobody looks like this anymore. And we did a
Hey,
fabulous
I did
photo.
my part. You guys have great photos, so you better be
Right.
using them.
Yeah, we did a great photo shoot and we've got some great pictures. I know David wants to update his. I might still use this picture because I look younger than the more recent photo shoot. But anyways, we're probably going to update it. Anyways, we did talk about, we have done pre-construction our podcast before, and we did a session on Bill 60 when it was hot off the presses when it first came in. So you can check that out on our podcasts wherever you listen to a podcast, or you can watch it on YouTube if you're so inclined. So please check it out and let us know. Let David know. Let me know if you want to be a guest on it, or if you have some good ideas or topics that you want us to cover. We always look for everybody's input in that. So, all right. So today's topic, we're going to talk about adjustments. So when you're doing a typical resale transaction, the seller is got a list price, an offering price, a starting point as to what it might be. You do your research. You're putting an offer in. There's going to be a negotiation. You're going to purchase and sale, and whatever is agreed upon is going to be your purchase price, and that's it, pretty much. When we close the transaction, there'll be adjustments for property taxes because the seller may have overpaid their share for the year. They may have underpaid their share. If it's a condo, there'll be an adjustment for common expenses because you might be in the middle of the month and maybe the seller paid for the full month. So there's a small adjustment back, or they haven't paid for the month. So it might be an adjustment in favor of the buyer. But that's basically it. But your purchase price is your purchase price. And it's pretty straightforward in a real resale transaction. When you're dealing with new construction or pre-construction, whatever you want to call it, there are usually a whole bunch of adjustments charged by the builder to the buyer in addition to the stated purchase price. But now, you will still have a negotiated purchase price at the beginning of your agreement of purchase and sale. But somewhere in the body of that agreement of purchase and sale, there'll be an adjustment clause. And it's buried in there somewhere. And any of you that have looked at a pre-construction agreement purchase and sale, it could be 20, 30 pages long sometimes with all the schedules and everything. But somewhere in the body of it, there'll be an adjustments clause. And it'll list and specify a whole bunch of adjustments. Some are potential adjustments and some will happen for sure in these adjustments. And we have to look at that because it could be, when you add them all up, it might be a few $1,000s, but it could be tens and twenties and $50,000 worth of adjustments sometimes. So it's potentially deal breaking for your buyer client. So you have to be aware of these things because could have a serious impact. And these adjustments have nothing to do with when you're buying pre-construction, are they paying for some upgrades? They're getting standard flooring, they're upgrading the flooring, they're getting standard carpet, they're upgrading the carpet, they're getting standard cabinets, but they might be paying for an upgraded cabinet. I'm not really focusing in this discussion about those type of additional costs, okay? Because obviously that's something your buyer is going to take into account too, but those are really upgrades. I'm talking about other adjustments that are going to be passed on from the builder to the buyer, usually in the statement of adjustments at the time of final closing. And we'll go through them. Now, the good news for you as agents, for me as lawyers, when we review the agreements of purchase and sale, is years ago, there was a change in legislation that required the attachment of Tarion Schedule B to every agreement of purchase and sale for pre-construction. So this is the government-run Tarion program that provides certain warranties for new construction. So the legislation also requires that builders attach a Schedule B, a Tarion Schedule B, to every single agreement of purchase and sale with new construction. Now, that Schedule B contains a summary of the adjustments that are otherwise buried in the body of the agreement of purchase and sale. Okay. And a builder has to list and describe those adjustments and where you can find them, by paragraph numbers in the agreement of purchase and sale and putting dollar amounts to it when there's an amount stipulated into it. That all has to be summarized in the Tarion Schedule B. And if they're not, the builder's not permitted to charge those things. So builders generally comply and do it. We don't very often find that they don't. So we still read the full body of the agreement of purchase and sale. When our law firm is retained to review an agreement of purchase and sale, we're still reading every word in the body of the agreement of purchase and sale. But we're also going to compare the actual adjustment clause in the body of the agreement of purchase and sale to Schedule B and make sure that was completed properly and there's no inconsistencies there. Now, some of the adjustments will have specified amounts attached to them, and that's great, okay, because we know exactly what that's going to be, whether it's an administration fee, whether it's some other thing. Like, we're always looking for things to have a number to it because there's no other way that we can give our respective clients any certainty on this if we can't try and flush out as many of those numbers for those adjustments as possible. But not all of the adjustments have numbers with them. So those are the ones we have to be a little bit more careful with. So that's what we're looking for. Okay, we're looking to review Schedule B. We're comparing it with the adjustments section that's in the body of the agreement of purchase and sale. And we're looking to see what amounts are actually stipulated and what amounts are not stipulated, adjustments without a stipulated amount, because usually we want to dig a little deeper with those because we don't want anybody signing an agreement that's open-ended as to what it might ultimately cost them. So we try and narrow it down. So the process that we go through whenever we're doing these reviews is to summarize it, first of all, for our mutual clients. But after we've done that, we're usually going to write a letter to the builder's lawyer saying we've reviewed it and we're asking for certain changes to the agreement of purchase and sale. And the purpose of that letter is to try and negotiate to either delete some of those adjustments if possible, or if we can't delete them, then let's put a number to it and find out exactly what it is. Or if it's an unknown number or potential number that the builder can't even tell us, then let's put a cap to it so we know what our maximum risk and exposure is for our mutual clients. So that's the exercise we go through. Now, we write those type of letters. Uh, it really, the response we get back from the builders and the builder's lawyer really depends on the market conditions at the time. When the market is humming along and there's a lineup at the builder's sales office, we're not usually very successful in negotiating some of these changes to an agreement purchase sale. When things are a slower market, we're usually much more successful in getting a few of these adjustments deleted and getting others capped and getting a little more certainty, okay? Because the builders are a little more anxious to get a transaction done. So a lot of these depend on market conditions. But we all know that if we don't ask, we never get. Okay. So, and I always use my hockey analogy. Like Mike Bossy was one of the greatest goal scorers in the history of the game, a pure goal scorer. And he was always asked, what's your secret for success? He says, whenever I got the puck, I always made sure that I put it on net. I never shot wide. I never shot high. I always wanted to get it on net, even if I didn't have time to pick a corner or to try and beat the goalie with a shot, because I knew 100% of the shots that I shot wide or over the net were not going to go in, and 100% of the time when I hesitated and didn't shoot, they weren't going in either. But the ones that I put on net, I either had a chance to score, or we had a chance for a rebound, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the same principle here. You don't write a letter, you don't ask for changes, you don't try and negotiate, you get zero. Okay? You just shot wide, you just shot high. So we send a letter, regardless of market conditions. We try and see what we can get out of the builder if there's anything to negotiate. Sometimes we get nothing. Sometimes we get a whole lot of things. Sometimes we're somewhere in between. But it's worth the effort all the time. So we're going to discuss some of the adjustments and some of the key adjustments. The first one is sort of an obvious one. It's realty taxes. Just like on a resale transaction, we want to adjust for property taxes. The difference is with pre-construction is that the property taxes are usually not assessed at the time of closing. The municipalities, regardless of who they are, usually adjust at some time after closing. Sometimes it's a few months after closing. Sometimes it could be a couple of years after closing until they finally get around to determining what the appropriate taxes would be that are effective as of the closing date. So a lot of times our adjustments on closing are based on estimates and the best information available, and then the parties undertake to readjust later once the final taxes are determined. But we have to pay attention to the property tax adjustment. So the builder's responsible for taxes up to the closing date. Buyer's responsible from and including the closing date. The day of closing is always the buyer's date for these types of adjustments. Same thing on a resale transaction. The day of closing is always the buyer's day. So there's usually some language right in the agreement of purchase and sale that'll say that there'll be a readjustment. The parties will adjust once the taxes are actually determined by the municipality. And it's usually done by way of supplementary tax bills that are issued. And sometimes, like I said, it could take the municipality a long time to get around to doing that. But there'll be an adjustment usually once that happens. And it could be in favor of the builder, it could be in favor of the buyer. Okay. Now, if the new construction is a condominium, there's some additional adjustments. Okay. Now, condominium closings, most of you should be aware, pre-construction, usually there are two closing transactions for a new construction condominium. There is usually an occupancy closing at the time that the buyer is physically given possession of the property. They can start living there. But we can't close the final transaction yet because the condominium hasn't been registered yet. So we can't actually transfer title to the buyer yet, which means the buyer can't get their mortgage funding yet. So there's a system where the buyer will pay an occupancy fee until we get to the final closing. And the occupancy fee basically has three components in it. It's a component for the estimated monthly common expenses. It's estimated property taxes, and it's interest on the amount that they're not paying at that time. So, and this will all be specified in the adjustment clause that there will be adjustments for those things. And then we get to the final closing. because the occupancy fees were payable based on estimated amounts, we get to the final closing, we're going to do a readjustment for the actual occupancy fees because they can figure out how much they should have been during that occupancy period. Then there'll be an adjustment for whatever the actual monthly common expenses are for that month. There will almost always be a contribution to a reserve fund for the condominium corporation. Usually it's 1, 2, or 3 months worth of common expenses that's sort of paid at the time of closing. And that, could be a significant amount. Just to put a number to it, if the monthly common expenses were to be $500 per month, then the reserve fund, if it was 3 times the common expenses, there'd be a $1,500 payment at the time of closing as the contribution of the buyer towards the reserve fund. Okay, so that's the way something like that would be calculated. Now, when we close a condominium pre-construction, we're going to want to get a status certificate from the condominium corporation. The adjustment clause almost always says that the cost of that status certificate would be paid for by the buyer at time of closing. It's a $100 statutory amount, but that's just one of the adjustments. Sometimes they pass on certain condominium registration fees, which we don't generally like them to do, and we try and negotiate out. But there's those type of adjustments that are sort of unique to a condominium transaction that you wouldn't see if it was a detached home or a freehold townhome. Now, HST is handled differently on pre-construction than it is in resale transactions. And there's two different elements of HST. So most of you that are familiar with resale transactions, you know that your buyer clients are not usually paying HST in addition to a purchase price. And the reason is that there's an exemption in the Excise Tax Act for resale transactions. Because the general rule is HST is payable on everything unless there's an exemption. There happens to be an exemption for a retail residential property that there would not be HST on it. Okay, now there's an exception to the exemption if it happened to be a major renovation to a resale property prior to that closing, then it might trigger HST and it might be treated like new construction. But generally, most of your resale transactions don't have HST payable on them. That's not the case with new construction. With new construction, HST is payable on every single transaction. Now, the way the builders generally deal with that is they generally set up their agreements with the purchase price, the negotiated purchase price, and usually there'll be something in the agreement that says the purchase price includes HST. So HST is still payable, but the price is included in the price. Now, that's really important. It's one of the first things that we have to look at and review to make sure that the agreement actually says that, because most of them do, but sometimes they don't. And it's really important because if it doesn't say that, then if your client's buying a $1 million property, they're going to pay HST on top of that $1 million price, unless it says the HST is included in that price. So that's really important. So that's one of the aspects of HST that we look at. The other thing we're looking for when reviewing these agreements is the HST rebate, because that could be a real significant add-on to the price that your clients are paying. So the HST new housing rebate is different from HST. HST is payable based on the purchase price of the transaction. Okay, normally, like I said, builder says HST is included. Purchase price is paid on closing. The builder will remit the HST portion of that to the government. Now, the HST new housing rebate is different. The agreement will say that usually there's a rep and warranty on behalf of the buyer that the buyer will apply for and be eligible for an HST new housing rebate. Now, they're not always eligible for it, okay? But the agreement will say that the buyer will apply for that rebate and then assign the rebate to the builder. Now, just to put a number to it, let's assume that the rebate is $24,000, which it often is. So the way it will work is if the buyer is eligible for that rebate, the buyer will sign documents to apply for the rebate and then assign it to the builder. So on closing, the buyer will pay the builder the $1 million purchase price. The builder will send those documents, HST rebate documents, to the government, and the government will send the builder $24,000. So the builder ends up with $1,024,000, but only $1 million from your client. Now, the agreement of purchase sale will also say that if the buyer was not eligible for that HST rebate, that the buyer agrees to pay an amount equal to the rebate to the builder as an adjustment on closing. So if they're not eligible, on closing, the buyer will pay $1,024,000 to the builder because the builder won't get the $24,000 from the government. So the builder is going to get that money from your buyer client. So that's a $24,000 payment in addition to the purchase price. Now, the eligibility for the HST rebate really depends on whether the buyer intended at the time they signed the agreement to move in themselves as their principal residence for themselves or an immediate family member. And the builder will be looking to get evidence of that and declarations sworn, et cetera, in support of that. Anytime a builder gets a small whiff that the buyer may not be buying to move in, or the buyer might be speculating or might be buying for an investment or something like that, they will not give the benefit of that rebate adjustment to the buyer and will insist that the buyer pay them that $24,000 on closing, and the buyer can, after closing, if they so choose, they can apply for the HST rebate themselves directly with the government, and if they're successful, they'll get the $24,000 back. Okay, so that's generally the way these things work. So it's really important that we deal with it properly and ask the appropriate questions to your buyer client before they sign an agreement purchase sale. Why are you buying this property? Who's going to be living there? And explain to them why, because it really affects this HST rebate. Otherwise, they're going to pay potentially $24,000 in addition to their purchase price on closing. Okay, so it's an important question, and it goes to the intent of the buyer at the time they sign the agreement of purchase and sale. Okay, now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about development charges, and then we'll get into Bill 60 a little bit. Now, some of the most significant adjustments that builders pass on are development charges. So development charges are fees that municipalities and the province of Ontario generally would be charging the builder as part of the construction process for the development of the condominium or the development of the subdivision, etc. There's certain charges that the governmental authority is charging the developer or the builder. And then under the agreement of purchase and sale, the builder is trying to recoup some of those charges or all of those charges, if they can, from the buyer. And they're doing that in a lot of cases in addition to the purchase price. And the reason it sort of works that way is at the time that a builder goes to market, whether it's a condo or it's a detached home, they don't know necessarily what all of the potential development charges are. They might have estimates, they might know what some are, but it's always open to there being potential additional development charges that they don't know. So whatever they know about, they're sort of baking right into their purchase price because they know certain costs, just like they know the cost of their bricks, they might know the cost of their lumber. They may have certain development charges that they know about. Others they may not know about yet. And development charges take all shapes and form, but these are the way the government gets funding to pay for all the services that are required for any development. You need roads, you need transit systems, you need water, you need sewers, you need community centers, you need schools, you need emergency facilities, you need parkland, all of those things. Okay, the government pays for most of those. Some of it's paid by people paying their regular property taxes, but a lot of it is contributions that they get from the builders and developers as part of the development process. You want to put a condo here? Sure. But there used to be 4 detached homes here. We're knocking those down and you're putting up a condo that's going to have 300 units. We're going to need more schools. We're going to need more parkland somewhere. We're going to need, et cetera. We need more transit improvements. We've got to widen the road, et cetera, et cetera. So they charge the builders and developers by way of development charges. Okay, and we see it different ways. It might be education levies, it could be parkland levies, transit levies, school levies. These are all types of development charges for the purposes of this discussion. Okay, and some are charged on a local municipal level, some are charged on a provincial level. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns with it because a lot of it hasn't been determined. So the way the agreement purchase sale, there's usually a clause in there that says, before I talk to Bill 6, I just want to explain this part to you. What you usually find in the adjustment clause, it says that if there are any new charges, new development charges after the time the agreement is signed and prior to closing, or if there's any increases to any other charges they know about now, that the buyer will bear the risk of those and will pay for those on closing in addition to the purchase price. So when we're reviewing an agreement purchase sale, that's a really important clause to look at because those development charges could be nothing. It could be a couple $1,000 and it could be $50,000, depending on what type of development charges might come into play. And you got to remember, there's a long time frame for a lot of these projects. Sometimes people are signing these agreements for itself 5 years before they're actually going to move in. During that time, there might be a couple elections on municipal levels. There could be a couple provincial elections. There could be new laws passed to create new development charges or other charges. At one point, there was no such thing as GST and HST. And all of a sudden, there's a change. So you never know what the future holds. So the builders are all saying, we don't want to take the risk of that. We want our buyers to take the risk and be responsible to pay any increase in development charges or new charges. So what we try to do, if we can, we want to eliminate that clause. We don't usually get it out successfully, but occasionally we do. But other times we want to at least put a cap on it. Okay, let's say we cap it at $5,000. So if we get that negotiated and it turns out the development charges end up being $10,000, that means that our buyer client is only going to have to pay $5,000 of it, and the builder has to absorb the other $5,000. So if we can't delete it, we want to cap it. Now, obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty both for the builders, developers, and also for potential buyers with these development charges. So Bill 60 comes along, and this was an attempt by the government to get a little more information and more transparency in the system and get rid of some of the red tape for dealing with this. Because part of it is to get more developed quickly and get more construction to happen quickly, get rid of some of the tape because it started with there's a housing shortage, and we want to be able to build and build faster. So part of the Bill 60 is introduced for that reason. But part of it also reforms the Development Charges Act. And the reason for that is to get more consistency in the system, get more transparency. And the provincial government wanted to have more oversight on the municipalities, partly to get more consistency, to force their transparency, and to think that they can do a better job than municipalities are doing and get that information out and make it available so everybody can know what those development charges are on a faster basis, and so we know what they are. So that's one of the elements that Bill 60 did. It reformed some of the Development Charges Act for those purposes. Okay, so this has a direct effect on the development charges that are going to be passed on to buyers as part of these adjustments in pre-construction transactions. Now, this is brand new law that just came into effect at the end of the year, last year, and some of the details are still being worked out in regulations, et cetera, et cetera. And as part of this, the builders will be modifying their agreements of purchase and sale. I'm pretty certain they're all going to be doing it to some degree. And we're going to have to take a hard look at the language and the changes they're making in their agreements of purchase and sale in order to comply with Bill 60 and see what effect this actually has. So it should have some effect. We hope for the better. We hope that it has the effect of allowing these projects to get completed a little bit faster with less red tape. But we also hope it'll facilitate us finding out what these development charges are and being able to see them and know exactly what they are instead of just accepting a statutory declaration from a builder that there was an increase, or this is the amount of the increase. There should be a better system available for us to be able to see exactly what these development charges are. So a couple of the changes in because of these development charges are outlined here. Separate land acquisition cost category must be identified. Municipalities are required to adopt formal local service policies. They're expanding provincial oversight because the province thinks they could do a better job than municipalities. So there's mandatory disclosure of development charges, studies, and bylaws upon request because the provincial government is going to be doing oversight over all the municipalities for this. And they want, if it works, great. I'm all in favor of it. There'll be more consistency, there'll be more standardization on how these development charges are determined, how they're justified, make sure they're good and how they're calculated properly. If the buyers are going to pay for them, we want to know exactly what they are and that it's fair and reasonable. We're still going to have our negotiation with the builder because regardless of how much they are, how fair it is, we don't want to pay them if we're on the buyer's side. So we still want to try and negotiate it out. We're still going to want to reduce them if we can. We're still going to want to cap it if we can. But hopefully we're in a system where there's a little more transparency. We have more knowledge. So when we go to do that, so like I said, we still want to go through exercise of capping them regardless. Might get more information about what they are and how they're calculated, but we still don't want to pay them if we're acting for a buyer. We want to, you and I, acting for our buyers, want to keep the costs reduced as much as possible. But when we do have to pay them, at least we will have an ability to give our purchaser clients an explanation of what they are, how they're calculated. And a lot of times before they sign the agreement of purchase and sale, we might have a lot more information. So they'll know that in addition to their purchase price, there's going to be $5,000 in development charges or $10,000. And they can make their decision of whether to firm up their deal or not, based on more information. So that's always a good thing. Okay. Now, some of this, we're going to have to see how everybody deals with it. And only, the future will tell whether this is going to be successful. But in theory, it should help. It should help get more things developed quicker. It should help for the builders and developers to know what their costs are going to be so they can pass on truer costs to the buyers. And it should help the buyers. But regardless, there still will be a charge and adjustment for these development charges at the end of the day. Some other adjustments that I want to just give you some information on is for utility services and meter installations. Almost every single builder's agreement purchase and sale has these clauses in their adjustment clauses that said that the buyer is going to pay a certain amount as an adjustment on closing for the installation of utilities, electricity, gas, water, things like that, and for meters and connection charges for these things. So it's, you just can't imagine doing that on a resale transaction where, okay, you're going to pay $1 million for this house, but by the way, we're charging an additional fee if you want to connect your water meter and your hydro meter and things like that. You don't go through that exercise, but you do with new construction. These costs are added on in this adjustment clause. Now, sometimes these are $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 types of adjustments. Sometimes it's just there's more than one because they have a separate charge for a meter installation and a separate charge for connection of utilities. So we want to see what there is. And again, whatever there is in the body of these adjustment clauses should also be reflected in Schedule B. The Tarion Schedule B should be summarized there as well. So sometimes it could be a really significant amount. To me, even if it's a couple $1,000, it's a significant amount because there's other adjustments too. So again, we're going to try and negotiate them out if we can, depending on market conditions. If not, we want to put a number to it if we can, or put a cap on it. So there's usually also another adjustment clause. Some utility providers require a security deposit to provide those utilities to the house or wherever it is. that's something that usually has to be paid at the time of closing. So again, it's another cost that a buyer would potentially have to come up with at the time of closing. It'll be on the final statement of adjustments. There's other costs that are generally in there. There's builders administration fees and legal fees. These are the builders' legal fees that are being passed on to buyers. So we look to see what those are. And again, we go through the exercise of seeing if we can negotiate them out, if we can put a cap on it, if we could, put a number to it. Um, uh, you know, um, Most of the agreements have an administration fee attached to receiving deposit checks. For those of you that done pre-construction, a lot of times there's a deposit paid at the time of signing. Sometimes it requires a series of other deposit checks be provided, post-dated, 3, 4, 5, 6 over a period of time. But there's a clause in the agreement that allows the builder to charge an administrative fee for handling each of those deposit checks. And it might be legal costs they're incurring for dealing with the deposits as well, especially if it's a condominium transaction. Deposits are usually held and certified through the builder's lawyer, and the builder's lawyer will charge fees, and those fees get passed on under these adjustment clauses. So we want to take a look and see what those potential adjustment clauses are and potential legal fees are, and again, go through the exercise of negotiating them out, putting a number to it, or capping it. There's usually other admin fees or legal fees that get triggered if there's default or things like that under the agreement of purchase and sale, or if there's an NSF check or things like that. But we want to see what those are, make sure they're also in Schedule B, let our clients know what those potential administrative fees or legal fees that are passed on to them could be. So we always want to flush those out as well. And the other common adjustment, the last thing that I want to just give you some information on it is these common adjustments as well. New construction has a warranty through Terrian, which is great. Okay, the projects get enrolled, the detached house or the condominiums, regardless, any new construction gets enrolled with Terrian, and there are certain warranties to the benefit of the buyers associated with that, which is all great. And it's part of their protection to make sure everything gets completed properly physically and things are fixed and repaired, and they get what they bargained for in the agreement of purchase and sale. So there's advantages to all that. There's protection for them under Terrian if projects get delayed, if projects get canceled, compensation fees. There's a whole bunch of benefits to the Terrian enrollment for a buyer. So for the purpose of today's discussion, just so you know, there's a cost for that enrollment, and that cost gets paid by the buyers. The builders don't pay that. There's always an adjustment clause that says that the buyers on closing will pay whatever that Terrian enrollment fee is as an adjustment on closing. So again, we want to know what that is so we can let our clients know what that's going to be. There's some other costs that we typically find in the adjustment clause that are listed here. There's a law society transaction levy, which is only $65 plus HST, that the builder's lawyer is really subject to, but that cost is being passed on and will be paid for by the buyer as an adjustment on closing. There's a home construction regulatory authority oversight fee. That cost is passed on as an adjustment. Buyers typically pay that. There's electronic document exchange fee, which could range depending on the transaction. If most transactions these days do close by electronic execution of documents. Some builders still don't. There's many that refuse to close with electronic signing, and they want ink on documents, especially certain documents like the HST new housing rebate application and that. They want wet ink on those. But some other documents can be signed through electronic means, but there's usually a cost that's being passed on by the builders to the buyers, so they're paying a charge, and it might be $100, could be $500. We've seen it higher than that as well. I mentioned before there could be NSF fee charges, if deposit checks go bad, we see different ranges and things like that. Sometimes we see things like a driveway paving charge. And yeah, you bought a detached house. Oh, you want your driveway paved? We're going to pave it for you, but you're going to pay an additional amount for that in addition to your purchase price. Stuff like this sometimes, gets our collective heads shaking, and certainly a buyer, they might spend, $2 million to buy a brand new detached home, and now they got to pay, $5,000 to get the driveway paved because that's what the agreement of purchase sale says. So we want to take a look and make sure that our clients are aware of things like that. So once upon a time, builders didn't operate this way with all these adjustments being passed on. Once upon a time, you bought a house for $1 million, let's say, and it included everything, all costs were included in that. And then at some point in time, builders started finding a way for these add-ons. Now let's charge fees to bring the utilities there. Let's charge connection fees. Let's charge meter fees. Let's charge to pave the driveways. Let's charge these other things like that. They haven't gotten to the point where they're charging separately for the bricks and the lumber and things like that. But there's enough already in these adjustment clauses that we have to pay attention to because it might be sometimes it's minimal, sometimes it could be a couple $1,000s, but sometimes it could be $50,000 or more, especially when there's development charges that are being hit in there. And none of what I've talked about so far has anything to do with assignments, okay? Because if your client wants to buy it as an investment or potentially flip it, and they want to assign the agreement at some point in time, for sure, well, they will need the consent of the builder to an assignment. And one of the conditions for the builder's consent to an assignment will be a significant assignment fee paid to the builder, and usually a rather significant fee for their legal fees that the builder is going to incur because their lawyer is going to have to draft up a consent to the assignment. So that sometimes could be very significant. And we've seen that sometimes as low as $2,000 in assignment fee, and we've seen it as high as $55,000 as an assignment fee. So we always want to take a close look at that type of language as well. And if the clients are potentially assigning, and that's an important part of their purchase transaction, we want to for sure have an opportunity to negotiate that assignment clause and put numbers to those assignment fees and legal fees and cap it if we can, because that could create a lot of uncertainty to a potential builder. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you. I think that's all the information I wanted to really give to you. So Sabiha, David, I'm going to pass it back on to you. You might have some questions. I'm happy to stick around and answer as many questions as I can.
That was a great presentation, David.
Thanks, Jeff.
I did have a couple of questions, if that's okay with the others.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Because I recently did we call it pre-construction, but it was an inventory, deal. And already, it was already paid, so there were no development fees. Sorry, David, I tried to pass it your way, but they already had their own lawyer.
Yeah.
That happens sometimes.
I'll forgive you, Jeff. I know it's not,
Yeah.
In spite of your best efforts.
I just want to let you know I tried.
I'm sure you did.
And so there were no development fees. I guess the buyer, the builder, being Mattamy Homes, they were trying to get rid of some inventory, and so they had all these perks. But one thing I noticed when it came to commissions for the realtor commissions, they had a note, let's say it was 3% net of HST. And so I inquired what that meant, and the builders have a formula where, let's say the purchase price was 500,000, you're not getting paid 3% plus HST on the 500,000. they net out. They have a calculation where they net out, and it's net. So it actually would come out to maybe, 480, and you're getting 3% of the 480. Are you familiar with this? Our
Uh,
our
that
trade
that doesn't
deal.
sound that unusual. I generally don't pay attention
On the
to
commission side,
but to the
right?
commission side of it because it's, I'm not retained by the agent to
Yeah,
negotiate that. So we don't generally look at that, so I really can't comment. But it's a good point, Jeff, because you guys want to get paid and you want to get paid properly, and not every builder deals with commission the same way.
correct.
Unfortunately, there's many builders that don't even let you get in the door because they insist that buyers use certain in-house realtors and things like that. But for those projects where you're allowed to get in, and there's many, many of those, just be careful and take a hard look at it because builders deal with those things differently. So you don't want to be surprised at the end of the day. Whether it's negotiable or not, I don't know. Again, maybe it is sometimes depend on market conditions.
Right. Again, like like you said earlier, David, if you don't ask, you won't get. And I do ask
Exactly.
I do ask when it comes to, I know it's not something you get into with commissions, but I do ask because I think we work hard and we all deserve to get paid for what we do.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it can be misleading is where I'm going with this. If there's any other agents online here that's done this, and I'm sure Sabia knows what I'm talking about. Um, and then you get a check, and it's sometimes it's just misleading, but the trades department knows kind of what they're doing and stuff like that. One last thing with regards to utilities that you mentioned. Um, do the builders sometimes use their own um, utility companies to set that up, or is that the responsibility of the buyer and all those fees? Because I've heard different things about that.
Yeah, it depends on the project. It's not usually the builders don't have a utility company, but a lot of times, they've set it up with the utility, company for that particular project. Whether it's it might be a governmental utility or it might be private. And sometimes you don't have an option to opt out. You have to accept and do the deal because that's the only utility provider for certain services. Is, in particular when it's a condo, it's usually one provider of certain services to the building. And you sort of have to sign up with them and they may have a security deposit requirement, maybe they don't. And and part of your closing documents is, the builder want to see evidence that you signed up with them.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, quite often, like for instance, with internet, like a lot of downtown buildings have Rogers, and that's the only one you can go with.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's even included in the in the in the maintenance fee. So, but you
Oh,
do have to sign a contract with them.
one important thing that I don't know if it came up today, and with I have a client that bought directly from the builder, and the project is being delayed. And I think somewhere in the contract there's a delay date where you can get when you can get out of the contract if
Yes.
construction has not started. Do you have
Yes.
information on that?
Yeah, so that's another good question, Jeff. So remember, I was talking about Schedule B, the Terrian Schedule B that has to be attached to every agreement of purchase and sale. Okay,
Right.
it's mandatory, and that sets out like the summary of all these adjustments that we were talking about today. There's also a Terrian Schedule A that has to be attached to every pre-construction agreement of purchase and sale. And it's in Schedule A that the builder has to complete what the expected closing dates will be and the outside date for the potential closing date, etc. And then part of the body of that schedule has all the information for buyers about delayed the rights of the parties if there's delays for the closings and the rights of the buyers to potentially getting compensation or to terminate a transaction which it's all set out in the standard Schedule A form. Okay. So it's a very long answer to tell you whether or not they can get compensation or whether they can terminate agreement. But builders have a certain amount of time where they can unilaterally extend a closing date, and the buyers have no choice. They can't get out of the deal. Once they use up that unilateral right and they want to extend further, then there's a window where a buyer can say, "No, I'm not accepting your extension. I want out. Give me my deposit back, and I'm going to move on." So those rights are all set out in that Schedule A. So we want to make sure that Schedule A is attached to every single agreement purchase sale. It has to be. It's not optional. It's mandatory. Builders can't, the parties can't negotiate out of it. It has to be attached. And that's the protection for buyers and where they can see their rights. So I encourage any of you, just, get a copy of that schedule from Terry.
David,
Just
on
take a
that
look and
note,
see what it says.
sorry, on that note, I just wanted to ask you this. So yeah, high rises mostly are covered under Tarion, but there are some individual like small, I shouldn't even say subdivisions, but when they have like three or four houses custom built or it's a commercial. A lot of us also sometimes deal with pre-construction commercial units.
Yeah.
They're becoming more and more popular, these condo units. What happens then? Like, what kind of protection does an individual have against the builder when there is no Tarion warranty?
Then it's just a matter of contract law. Okay. It's whatever the agreement of purchase sale says. And there's either parties either comply with the agreement of purchase sale or they're in breach of the agreement of purchase sale, and then rights flow from that. The protection is different for residential buyers, because this is their home, their potential home. So so really it's different.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of really prudent because we talked about a lot of builders. Jeff pointed out to some builders not actually working with realtors. It's not just about commission earning, guys. It is really important for individuals to be represented by a realtor, and then in turn, right off the bat, if you're dealing with a property, even with a small builder, which does not have Tarion warranty and it is a residential to write off the beginning of the contract to share it with maybe there's no cooling period, but right in the beginning share it with your lawyer and find the right correct real estate lawyer. I've seen a lot of realtors that go in, get the deal done, and don't advise their clients in getting a real estate lawyer till the very end.
Yeah. And on that
Not
note,
the smartest thing to do.
yeah, and on that note, I could tell you, the type of transactions you got to be very careful about. There's a lot of people out there that build houses one-off, right? Just they're building one house. They bought up an old house, they tore it down, they're building a brand new house, but then they're selling it as a resale because the builder moved in or alleges they moved in or their family, somebody moved in, they lived in it for a month or 2 months or a period of time, and now they're trying to sell it as a resale and not new construction. We got to take a hard look at the facts on those situations to see whether it really is a resale. And if it is, there's no Tarion protection. There's no warranty protection. So now you got a new house someone might buy, and there's a crack in the foundation or there's a leak somewhere or they don't finish it. They have no recourse to Tarion. Their only recourse is back to the builder, the seller. And they may buy it, bought the house under a new corporation, and the only asset that corporation had was that house. And then they sell it and and the next project they do, they incorporate another company, and buyers have nobody to go after for those type of defects. So you got to be very careful in those situations when it's really sort of a new construction, but it's sort of being sold as a resale. Okay. So if you're protecting a buyer, you're better off if the buyer is buying it new and it's from a builder that enrolled with Tarion because they get all that built-in protection. Okay. So just be careful anytime you're looking at those type of projects. Make sure the lawyer, who's one of the lawyers in our firm, hopefully, is reviewing that agreement of purchase and sale to see what it really is, and then your role is to also, dig down a little bit and just try and figure out, is this, did someone really live there for a period of time? Is this a resale? Is it brand new and no one's really ever lived there, etc. It also affects things like the new housing HST rebate and whether HST is included in the price or not included in the price. A lot of things we talked about here. So it can't be a hybrid. It's either new construction or it's resale. It can't be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And there's a lot of sellers out there that are trying to sell homes that are, well, it's brand new, no one's ever lived there, HST is not payable, but it really is brand new construction. HST is payable, and you don't want your client to pay HST. So, okay, we got to do our homework and dig down a little bit.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David.
Okay.
Like I said, we will be sharing this on our YouTube channel. So if you need to, you can always go back and refer to it, and you know where to find David.
Thank you, David Corman.